Set deep in the rainforest, Ancient takes place in an archaeological site in Central America. Within these, what seem to be Aztec ruins, we have close quarter battles, multiple shadow advantages, and some extremely rewarding map control. And in this video, I intend to cover as much as I can about everything on this map. If you're someone who's trying to learn Ancient, or just someone who's got the basics down, then this video will take you right from the beginning all the way to advanced strategies and in-depth knowledge. When discussing a map, which is something I've not done before, I'm going to start off simple by looking at the overall map layout. Ancient is, like all other maps, a 3-lane map, meaning we have 3 lanes going from top to bottom, one in the form of A main, one being B ramp, and then the other one being mid. As you can see, there are other connecting hallways between the 3 lanes, one being Cheetah, which leads into Cave, and the other one being Donut, leading into the A bomb site. These connecting areas have their own uses and impact on how your rounds are going to unfold, but we'll get to that later. Right off the bat, you'll notice that the rotation from bomb site to bomb site for both teams is this big long stretch across the top and bottom of the map. The T side will take quite a bit longer to fully rotate because of their connecting line being further down and the bomb sites being further up. However, the T side have the option to take Heaven, which would kind of bring their connecting line up. This would include taking Cheetah control and mid control, but if accomplished, they can cut their rotation time down significantly and also have access to Cave or Donut, giving them multiple avenues of entry into each site. For CTs on the other hand, you might think that mid isn't as important because the rotations are already fast, but you'd be massively misled. Mid is important for the CTs in a multitude of ways. Not only does it prevent these T-side rotations, but it also gives us round defining duels. Like, entertain my hypothetical of course, but if we took full mid control at the start of the round, we can jump into Heaven and assist in clearing B ramp. Just to show how impactful this is, remember that we've cleared mid and outside B, meaning that it's almost certain that the entire team are outside A. Obviously, it's very unlikely that the T side will give you mid uncontested. And also, it's important to reflect on the fact that if we do die at mid without a trade, the T side are rewarded with the fast rotations we spoke about before, and also flank potential. Now, I'm throwing a bunch of information at you and it might be quite overwhelming, but I really want to hit home on the importance of mid control early in the video. There are some other important areas of the map, and we'll get to that. You might still be asking yourself how many CT should even hold mid, and it's typically 2, or 1 if you want to bolster one of the sites. Alongside the 2 or 1 at mid, we'll have 1 at A, and 2 or 3 at B. This isn't like a rule, I'm more saying it because if you queue up in a solo game, most players will expect this setup. There are many variations of this, and each position can double up on responsibilities, meaning they might be in charge of one thing, but can be flexible to assist elsewhere too. In order to discuss this further, I want to take a moment to talk about each position and the responsibilities they have. I'm going to be showing a basic CT setup. We will cover more advanced setups later, but yeah. We'll start off from the B site and make our way across the map. On B, we have at least 2 players in a typical round. One who's going to be a rotate/cave player, who, as the name suggests, is going to be the first to rotate from the site if needed, and the other one being a site anchor, which is the player who's going to stay at the site until the later stages of the round. As we're in charge of holding ramp and cave, instantly when arriving to the site, it's crucial to molly off ramp, as the T-side can rush the site really fast. Alongside this, the cave/rotate player should throw this set of util on their way to cave. This will provide some chip damage and pressure. In the early round, the cave player wants to get his eyes on the Heaven cross and maybe win a fight. Note that if the T side run to Cheetah without stopping, they'll meet you right as you get to this doorway. That's why this molly is so important in my opinion, because it lands in time to damage the player we're facing, and not only does that make it a one-shot headshot for our M4, but the tick damage also gives us a heads up to know that we're likely going to face this guy. As we come out of the opening sequences of the round, we don't have to stick around in Cheetah. It isn't a necessity. For example, if we sense a lot of pressure on B ramp instantly, it's a good idea to cancel the idea of taking cave completely and help hold the site instead. Although if you do want to play in Cheetah, you can get a lot of sneaky plays around smokes, as there's almost always one here. Someone I enjoyed studying for this video was Snacks on Team G2. He was always inside of this smoke making, albeit risky, plays, but it was fun to watch, innit? Additionally, as I said in my wallbang video, you can shoot through these wooden bits of the wall, which is always handy. I actually just got a kill with this just last night. Happy days. The dynamics of this part of the map are really simple when you break it down. We want to hold this angle to cut off Heaven and mid, But if it's really unsafe, we can fall back and play in cave, where we can also play with a teammate. And if we can't, or don't want to, hold either of them, then we can always chill on site with something like this. Well, there's a bunch of site setups really, isn't there? And we'll likely touch on that more later. But for now, let's shift our focus back to the site player. I'd recommend playing long in the early round, as it's the only place which you can see all of ramp. From long you can jump spot, have nice flashes, and they can both be put together to get picks. Overall, it's a good position to apply pressure on ramp, and I believe it to be crucial to create a lot of that pressure outside B in the early stages of the round. It's a very important part of the map for the T side, as it connects to mid, so naturally, a lot of people are usually going to be here to secure it, meaning there's a lot of potential for your util to be more effective. Alongside that, it gives you a feel of the round. Are there a lot of people at B? Is there no one here? If you want to create this kind of pressure in your games, a great start is to smoke B doors, which you can actually do all the way from CT spawn. Adding this to the opening utility we spoke about before already creates a lot of pressure. We can kind of use this as a blank canvas and implement more ideas. And if you're planning on outright taking ramp, it might be a time where, you guessed it, you have a third player on B. This person doesn't even have to be too committed to the site. If a pop flash is all you want from them, they can throw it from back here. Bringing the conversation back to the site player, during the mid round, I wouldn't say there's a designated spot for them. From what I've seen in the pro demos I watched, usually the player will float around the site trying to get info but not being too risky. It's situational, but knowing what purpose each part of the map serves will help you understand your responsibility in that moment. Over at mid, elbow and heaven are what we're holding. As the T's can get to elbow rather quickly, it's a good idea to smoke it off. Once again, you can do this from CT spawn with this lineup. Alternatively, you can throw it from red room by standing next to this wall and aiming here, but this one won't land on time. Alongside the smoke, to solidify your defense, you can chuck a little molly in front of it too. Another util variation I like to do is to cover the whole area with 2 mollies. Simply throwing the same one as before, and then throwing one like this will stop T's from even peeking elbow. From here, it's an easy avenue into heaven, and you can quickly smoke elbow with the remaining embers of our molly. But let's not forget that we also have the option to play passively. This can look like one player in red room just jump spotting, or someone in donut holding this cross, or both. FaZe recently ran an interesting setup where they gave up mid control completely. They had 2 in donut, and then they had 3 at B, 2 of which were in cave, and the B anchor kept eyes on top ramp and CT lane. Mad that, innit? It's interesting to me that they allow map control that would make some people feel like they've gotten away with murder, but in reality, it's all part of what they're expecting. Funny enough, after I watched this demo, I queued up a FACEIT game and the guys on my team wanted to play like this. It's lucky I watched the demo because I instantly knew my role. But to be honest, I personally like the more traditional way of playing, taking mid with the protection of our util so we can contest heaven and get some decent information. If you're planning on doing this more traditional setup, it's important to remember that mid will have a lot of utility thrown at it in the early round. Much like outside B, the T side like to apply a lot of pressure at mid. People like to flash over here a few times, smoke your molly and maybe even run through it, or someone will at least molly the mid boxes, stopping us from going into heaven. The flashes we can just preemptively turn around from, but we do need to make sure that we turn back around in time to face the enemy. And if the T side do smoke your mollies, you can make it part of your opening utility to nade into the molly, so these players will either die or be really low health. Shifting back to the mid round again, after the dust has settled a bit, playing passively might be an easier route, but since there's 2 of us, and including the fact that one of us can have an AWP, we can have setups that work together. Super simple example of this is if an AWP wanted to hold Africa, the other mid player can take an off angle into heaven under their teammate's cover. Another use case for the Africa player is that they can boost us up into catwalk, so we can walk along to heaven, once again, under the cover of our trusty AWPer. Mid is an important position. It can overlap with other players' responsibilities like a Venn diagram, so being communicatively aware of the cave player in particular will be instrumental in your B hold, and assisting your A player can be as simple as listening to A main steps and donut. Speaking of the A player, we'll discuss their typical round now. They're typically a lonely soul, holding the A bomb site on his lonesome, because to be honest, A site isn't that active. Even looking at the layout, you can see why it's the case. There's one entrance from this far corner of the map, and then another one in deep mid, whereas B has an entrance in the other corner, but its alternative entrance is a major point of contention in a default round. I'm not saying they won't go A at all, but I see it kinda like the B site of Mirage. But yeah, the A player is usually solo. There are also some good early round fights you can take in A main. In fact, in a default round, which is where the T sides spread out and take map control, we'll talk about that soon. The point is that there's usually 1 or maximum 2 in A main, so you have a good chance to kill these players, especially with a setup like this. This can catch people off guard, but doing this every round might make it expected and will suddenly be less favourable for you. In the majority of rounds, you'll be sitting on site, temple, behind the big box, alone. You get my point. I think an underrated skill for these types of players is knowing when to rotate. Sometimes when your team are in the motions, it's hard to ask the questions you need to ask because they're also focused on what they're doing. I'm going to visualise this with some group bubbles. The people in this bubble are discussing the noise outside B and how they want to set up, whereas this group bubble are talking about smoke and elbow and going heaven or something like that. Everyone can hear each other, and important information is shared between them, but there's a level of focus to what is directly affecting you compared to what's happening elsewhere on the map. So for the lonesome A player, they'll sometimes be misheard in the comms, which might lead to them hesitating in their rotation. In that scenario, it would be much better to summarise all the information you have and then make a judgment call yourself. In some rarer cases, the CTs will even opt to play retake on A, which is where we leave the site completely open. This is arguably risky, but it depends how confident you are in your retaking abilities and how often the Ts are attacking the site. Even in the midsection of any ordinary round, you can post up with an AWP all the way back in CT, which gives up the site for a faster rotation. The basic opening util for an A player is a bit limited. You can smoke A main, or if you're playing aggressively, throwing a molly down the left or right hallway will single off your initial engagement. But for the most part, I'd more so be ready for a push, using my util quite sparingly because I'm the only one on site, and I try and keep at least a little bit of information on A main. It's easy to play back site, but you won't have any info, and when it comes to the time when you need to rotate, you won't be sure if there's a lurker waiting for you to leave. We've discussed the basic CT setup, but it can be quite hard to completely understand the dynamics when you're unsure of the common T-side setups. So in order to do that, we'll firstly discuss a default round. You'll hear this a lot playing in matchmaking, and I do feel like it can be a bit inconsistent. Its intention is for the team to evenly distribute themselves around the map, taking basic map control and trying to get an opening kill. So what basic map control do we want, and how do we get an opening pick in doing so? Well, if we want to improve our overall position in any round, then taking heaven and elbow is going to do that. The reason being is at the start of each round, we have the option of going B ramp or A main, whereas after taking heaven and elbow, we also have the option to take cheetah and cave, and in addition to that, we can take mid, which is a lot easier to do after the initial utility is used. This map control isn't going to be given for free. Luckily, after discussing the CT setups and common utility, you have a fair bit of knowledge on what's going to happen, which is a huge advantage. But knowing how to set ourselves up for success is going to be just as important. At B ramp, the main target is cheetah. I personally like to have 2 pushing up towards heaven and 1 player staying back, totaling at 3 players. The ramp player is, for the most part, stopping CT aggression, but can also assist the cheetah fight with some nice utility. First of which is a standard flash. Simply stand at the door and aim here and left click throw. It is a bit loose. If you're a higher level player, then you can likely just eyeball it from most positions. The second piece of utility is a molly that I've only just become aware of. It is a bit tricky. Whilst aiming at this brick, run and jump throw, this will molly inside of cave. And if thrown, this would pretty much win you cheetah. The only problem being is that it's really hard to throw consistently, so I recommend practicing this one a fair bit. Once we have cheetah, we can push into cave, mid, or we can freeze a bit and see how the CTs react. If we decide to continue our momentum into cave, the first thing to watch out for is the shadow advantage. Bit awkward, but even with a subpar flash, you can get the player off this angle for your peek. Continuing the theme of awkwardness, there are these 3 nasty spots for the CTs to play in. Maybe before you push, it might be a good idea to molly close and flash this angle. This way you can sort of clear cave without even stepping foot in there. And from cave, throwing utility onto short and long becomes a lot easier, and the ramp player can have much easier fights too. It's a pretty easy site take from here. And for the elbow player, they can start off the round by throwing a molly at the mid boxes to stop the CTs from peeking into B whilst your team are pushing cheetah. If you don't have one, it might be a bit tricky to guarantee your teammates safety, as there's almost always a smoke on elbow, or a barrage of nades. But whichever situation you find yourself in, if you have a HE grenade yourself, you can always try and pop the smoke and get a timing onto an unsuspecting CT. The rest of the round depends on what happens with the cheetah fight. If they take it and the round unfolds as we just discussed, then we should be holding the mid players from pushing towards heaven, forcing them to take an alternative rotation. This means that our teammates on site know for a fact that the opponents can only come from CT spawn. We can hold mid from elbow if we want to be more hidden, but especially if there's more than one of you playing this position, I'd recommend taking mid so you have a shorter rotation time to the bomb site in case you're needed. If I'm feeling cheeky, I will sometimes lurk my way up mid and flank the enemy rotators, but it all depends on whether or not I might be needed for the remainder of the round. Once again, another judgment call. Last but not least, the A main player is typically making sure no one has pushed A main, or that no one pushes A main and flanks the elbow player. Alternatively, they can create a bit of pressure on A to suggest that we're being active on this part of the map. This can skew the enemy comms and maybe stop the A site player from rotating. And again, depending on how the cheater fight unfolds determines our next move. If the round unfolds as we said earlier, we should probably rotate through spawn to B, or go and help the elbow player secure mid so that we can get to site through heaven, being both quicker and efficient. Overall, this round seems great. It's how I'd hope all my default rounds would go. But every round is different. Even if everyone on the server had the exact same movements and decisions, the gunfights alone aren't going to be consistent. And this is where mid-round calling evolves. It's that connecting line from our opening to what plan we want to execute afterwards. This can stem from any bit of information a team gathers. For example, if the cheater players die, but the A main player hears everyone leaving A, they might call for the team to slowly make their way across the map whilst they secure the site. This is a basic example, but it gets my point across. The plan can change multiple times in a round, but as long as we all share the same goal, we're a lot more likely to win. During the round, if your team is specific in their calls, you can visualize what the enemy setup is looking like and try and spot the weakness. But the most important thing for a mid-round call is for the whole team to listen and cooperate. It's really frustrating when someone calls a plan that will likely work, and someone decides that they want to stay where they are and do their own thing. In my opinion, it's an ego-centered mindset. You're caring more about your position rather than the team's. But I want to quickly take a moment to conclude our discussion on the default rounds because it sort of segued into the whole mid-round calling stuff. Much like how we spoke about the CT setup and each player's goals and responsibilities, we can look at the T side introspectively and understand everyone's purpose. And much like a CT setup, there are many variations of a default, and in the grand scheme of things, this is just a default round. Sometimes you might have a plan that you want to execute, and those rounds will look completely different. And speaking of executing a plan, I want to show you how to execute each site. I'm going to be showing you the important utility, the common CT positions, which naturally leads into the site entry itself. When entering B, we ideally want to smoke off long and short. Smoking cave is optional as we might be using that as a secondary entry point. Alongside the smokes, we can molotov pocket and default to make it really claustrophobic for the holding CTs, and on top of that we can do a variety of effective flashes. I would also recommend that the first or second person on the push has a smoke ready themselves, as the CTs might molly you as you push. This is more so if you're rushing B, as the molotov is part of the opponent's opening utility, and after you secure the site, it's typical that the T side will try and take control of long, as we can get flashed into CT lane for a favourable fight and also information. This makes life really hard for the CTs, as they can't even peek into short without possibly being shot in the side of the head. Alternatively, or additionally, the T side can take control of cave and ramp and play more so for the bomb, and from ramp and deep cave, you can also hold for any CTs trying to make their way in from heaven. Over at A, the smoke lineups can be a lot more creative as there's a lot more space in general, but the standard site takes involve smoking CT lane, which you can see me doing on screen now, donut, which again is on screen, and temple. All three smokes together block off each area that the CTs can rotate from, isolating the players on site. As for the positions on site, we should try and molotov Xbox and back site, as they're really annoying to deal with. And other than boost, they're the only positions the CTs can really play. During the push, it's also a good idea to flash over the top of A main, and throwing them to the left of our entry point will also blind the majority of positions on site. Holding A in the post plant on the other hand can be quite tricky. Pretty much every position on the site will leave you exposed to at least one avenue of entry. A good idea to combat this is to take control of one of the extremities. This can depend on where the bomb is planted. Also note that there's a shadow advantage in A main, which allows players from Xbox to see a shadow. This is easily avoided by crouching underneath the light, but the shadow advantage does also make an appearance in temple, allowing a player in CT to see someone's shadow. This one's just a pain in the ass, to be honest, and we're going to have to live with it, unfortunately. This shadow can also make it hard to play close temple, as you can't really jiggle from this corner without the enemy seeing your shadow. Mid isn't a site, but it's an area of the map that can be executed as if it were one. In the mid round, it is a lot easier to take mid, as the CTs have already used a lot of their utility in their opening sequence. If we were to look from a top-down point of view, ideally, we'd want to smoke Donut on window, and Molly in Africa. Alongside this, some flashes will obviously be helpful. If you wanted to achieve these smokes from T-spawn, you can do so with these lineups on screen now. There's a fair few ways of smoking this, including spawn-based lineups, but this is the way I do it, to be honest. You can also throw the set of utility from elbow, which might be better to do in a mid-round situation so you don't have to run all the way back to spawn. You can also molly Africa by coming back to this wall and lining this corner up with this brick, and whilst aiming as shown, running jump throw. This one's a bit tricky, so make sure you practice it, and you'll be sound. Depending on the state of the round, you might also want to be careful that no one peeks you from cheetah. This can easily be avoided with an additional molly, or just having someone hold it whilst the others are pushing. As for the flashes, you can simply throw one over here, flashing in front of Donut, and throwing them above this big door will flash pretty much every position. Note that if you're taking mid at the start of the round, the CTs will reach red room at about 1 minute 50 seconds, so if you double flash over these doors around then, it will likely fully flash both of them. And speaking of the early round, if you're running straight out elbow, remember the CT's opening utility. We want to be careful of a molly and some nades, so either smoke their molly and run through, or smoke the molly and wait for the nades before you push. We've discussed a lot, and for the most part, it's been hypothetical. So for this later stage of the video, I want to display some interesting rounds I saw in professional matches. This way we can use the knowledge from what we spoke about earlier, and apply it to digesting these amazing games, which is something that's usually quite hard to appreciate. The first round I want to show you is this pistol round that G2 played against FaZe. FaZe actually stacked towards B, meaning on G2's A push, they only had one person to face. But the interesting part about this round is the fact that once the bomb is down, everyone on site takes temple together, whilst Hunter is lurking at mid for information. Usually in our post plants we stop the enemy from getting any map control, but G2 understand that they can't take everything, so they'll take what's most effective at that time. I can't say for certain that this was the best move they could have done. I personally prefer taking control of places like A main or Donut, but they won the round, so who am I to complain? It also sort of shows that as long as we all commit to the same plan, it can still work. The next round I want to display is in the same game, and I want to watch it from Rops' perspective. As a mid/A player, we start off by throwing the double mollies in elbow and then doubling up in Donut. Once we feel the time is right, or maybe it's based off information from the team, we retake mid with the goal of having one in heaven assisting B, and another under heaven holding elbow. But as it's clear there's a lot of pressure on B, we both go for a retake from cave. It's a super simple round, but it shows that the CTs have to be proactive on mid in order to have an effective rotation for B. And one final round in the same game. This is a round which shows how to perfectly take B ramp as a CT. We're going to look at it from Snax' position, and ignore the lagging, my game tabbed out. Snax is throwing the cave player's standard util, and adds a nice flash and cheetah so we can rush right through the smokes. But what we don't see is the fact that the mid players have taken full mid control and gone straight to heaven, whilst the B player has smoked B doors and come down ramp to assist as well. After the dust settles, it's realised that no one's here, and after the team rotates to A, the T's actually rotate back to B. Snax has an unfortunate timing, but it gives us a chance to see Monacy work each angle as he falls back. He gets 2 on ramp, falls back to cave where he gets another on their site entry, and then he patiently waits for his rotate players whilst making sure he's in a safe place himself. And notice how after he sees the T's take cave, he doesn't overextend and face them. He runs all the way around to ramp, as he understands that a 3v2 from site to cave is much better than a 2v2 if he were to have died. It's a perfect example of staying alive being just as important as getting a kill. Really well played in this round. After seeing FaZe's CT setup against G2, I want to take a look at a B execute they did against Rare Atom. I think it's an interesting round as it takes place on the pistol round. Usually in our games we just go contact or rush on pistol round, but regardless, the round starts off looking a bit like a contact play, but after Karrigan gets boosted on the B boxes, the boys are poised to enter the site. All it takes is a smoke from Frozen and Brokey, and a flash after the smokes have landed. Notice how fast Rain is out onto the site after this flash pops. It's an understandably impressive round aim-wise, but it wouldn't have been possible without his high level of execution. From here, the round plays out as a favourable post plant for the T's, and also Rain picks up another smoke off a body and re-smokes short. Not a bad round at all. Best thing about it, boys, we only need 2 people to remember a smoke lineup, and for the pushing players to be ready in ramp to push site, not at the back of ramp. But yeah, I don't really know what to say it, boys, but what a time I've had making this video. It's been a hot minute since I've posted, so I wanted to make sure that this video was the best that it could be, and I definitely learnt a lot in the process, and I most of all hope that you learned something too. And if you did, or just enjoyed the viewing experience, then please let me know down in the comments section. It's nice to be at a stage where I can still read every single one of them. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye.